Right. All right. So we're returning now. Actually, we're finishing this speech that the Lubavitcher Rebbe gave in, here it is, 1962. And he is explaining, or maybe it was the end of 1961, in any case. So the Rebbe is explaining over here a very interesting thing about learning Torah. And he's doing it through an interesting question that we can ask about this week's Torah portion. In this week's Torah reading, Parshas Vayigash. So Yosef is the king of the whole world, and he reveals himself to his brothers, and he tells his brothers, go back to Israel and bring Yaakov. Yaakov, I guess, was then in Hebron. So he said, go over there and bring Yaakov back. So they go to Yaakov, and Yaakov says, what's going on? You know what happened? You went to Egypt? You brought bad food? Yeah, we got food. They said, listen, Dad, we got good news. Yosef, your son Yosef, you thought he was dead. Well, he's not. He's alive. And not only is he alive, but he's the king of Egypt. And not only is the king of Egypt, but he wants you to come down to see him, to live there. So, okay, he believes it. So Yaakov says, okay, but before I go, you, Judah, right, one of his sons, go down before me and establish there a places of learning, that's what it says, of learning Torah, because the Torah existed before it was given, and in Nikis, the 7 Noahide commandments for sure existed. And just, conduct, day-to-day conduct, what you're supposed to do in life, and also the secrets of the Torah, they certainly existed. Anyway, go down and establish places of learning. So the Rebbe asks the question, why did Yaakov had to send Yehuda down there to establish these places of learning? Yosef was already there. He could have established. He could have done it. So the Rebbe said, no. If Yosef establishes the places of learning, they're going to have the spirit of Yosef. In other words, the learning is going to be with the attitude of Yosef to the world. And so that we can't have that. It has to be Yehuda. Yehuda has to go. He's got a different attitude. What's wrong with Yosef's attitude? What's wrong? So the Rebbe explains. What was the difference between Joseph, and his brothers? And incidentally, that was the reason that they hated him, because he was different. And they knew that they were all righteous, holy, tzaddikim. And anyone that was different from them had to be something wrong. Yosef had a type of holiness that they didn't recognize. And because they didn't recognize it, and also he did other things also to indicate that he was like their enemy, or he was threatening to them, or they felt threatened by him. That's why they hated him and sold him down into Egypt. But the fact of the matter was, he was totally different. How? One way we can see is that Yaakov, that's right, Yaakov and all of his other sons, including Yaakov's father and grandfather, Yitzchak and Abraham, they all were shepherds. Yeah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, all of the other 11 tribes, right, the sons of Jacob, they all had to be shepherds. Why? Because they were holy people. They realized they were different people. They realized they were godly people. They had made a covenant with God. Abraham made a covenant with God, and they were going to be God's people, Creator's people, not creation people, not part of the creation. They were part of the Creator. They were the emissaries of God, and they had to, in order to do this, you have to keep your mind off the world and on the Creator all the time. And they couldn't do it. They had to be, so therefore they had to be shepherds. Which is not the case Yosef. Yosef was the opposite of being a shepherd. He was involved in the most busy and how do you say anti God place in the world, in Egypt. If there was ever a place where you had to get away from in order to have peace and quiet and a proper atmosphere, ambience to be holy, it was Egypt. You got to keep away. Egypt was terrible. And Yosef was totally involved in Egypt. He was involved all the time. And that in no way separated him from God. Okay, but we see that he was involved in the world. He was involved in the world. And that's going to be the whole point. We're going to see in 1 second. That's the whole point. If you want to establish a place of learning has to be something like being a shepherd, away from the world. A person who devotes himself to learning Torah, at least at the time when he's learning the Torah, and there's few years before his marriage, or maybe a couple of years after his marriage, his whole interest has to be learning Torah all the time. He has to be like the tribes, separated from the world. He can't be involved in the world at all. He can't be like Yosef. Here we go. So it says, Loitem, according to this, Alaman vet men verstands. According to this, everyone should understand, for Vas Yaakov, why it was that Yaakov had Gadar Shikan, he sent Yehuda to Einstein to establish the places of learning Talmud, Torah in Egypt. Un er. Let me make this bigger here so I can see what I'm reading, which is a very good thing to do. One basic lesson in learning Torah is you have to see what you're reading, huh? You have to see. So let's go. Here we go. Emistak, it's true. It says, therefore, the place of Talmud, and he could not, for Lozan, he could not rely on the method, the attitude of Torah that was held by Yosef. What was Yosef's attitude toward the Torah? And that's not fit for everybody. It's not a good way to learn. It says like this: as Taka, as Yosef at Tzedek, that Yosef is Alamo was always he was always united with and clinging ultimately with the Eibishter, with God, is as a hecherkeit is nogea to zayin neshama. This was a high level of soul which was only relevant to Yosef. Yosef was able to work in the world and be attached to God. It didn't disturb him. But in regarding to learning Torah, is zayin verschieden inyanim from Moshel b'kol Eretz Mitzrayim, from Vayilka Yosef, says that, but as far as learning Torah, now we're talking about learning Torah here. Yehuda, Yaakov agreed that Yosef was the ideal Jew, a leader involved in the world. The world did not have any effect on him whatsoever. He was totally united with God all the time. But learning Torah is something a little bit different. Learning Torah, you can't be like Yosef. Like we said before, Yosef, he was involved very, very deeply in the world. Had sein learning Torah, if his learning Torah, nitke ken sein and an ofen from a way of tachlit shlemut. So therefore, when he was learning Torah, he could not learn Torah with the ultimate completion. Why? Like it says, Torah to emunato. Like we said before, because Yosef, even though it's true that Torah, the world did not take him away from God, he was always connected with the godliness and everything in the world, but it did take him away from learning Torah. Learning Torah is a special endeavor. It's a special endeavor in Judaism. It's a special commandment, and it has its special uniqueness. When a Jew learns Torah, he has to be totally sunk into the Torah. He can't be involved in anything else. So automatically, is a gam by Yosef, the Yosef alone. Had chas v'shalom nit gefelt. Yosef, nothing was lacking in Yosef is aber but sulib olam v'kiyumo, which Torah is the first of the three pillars that the world is standing on. Had Yaakov knew that if you really want to have Torah learning in its pure way, Yehuda knows what that is, not Yosef. Why? Because Yehuda was Eres Gavin Aroitz, and he was a shepherd, upgesundet and separate from the world. And that's the way you have to learn Torah. To upstellen in Mitzrayim a yeshiva, in order to build and establish in Egypt a yeshiva, or Beit Talmud, in a place of learning Torah, Vudi was learn Torah, Zolan Klon nit haben sutan mit andere inyanim. When you learn Torah, you're not supposed to have anything to do with anything else. Wie hoich ze sollen nit sein, no matter how high they are. Oich and often in a way from a merkava, even if a person is a chariot to God, a vessel, a vehicle for godliness like Yosef was. But still, when Yosef was involved in the world, he was not involved in Torah. There's a ganzen esek. It has to be a person who learns Torah. It has to be totally involved in Torah. It can't be the way that Yosef did. At least in the couple of years when a person learns. Torah on an ahora is the Torah and its teachings is for every generation. Talmidia yeshivas, the people who learn in yeshiva, boys that learn in yeshiva, darfan veisen, they have to know. As their inyan is nor Torah, their whole thing is only Torah. So Andra Zachan, the other things, haben ze kein shum shaychas nit. They have no connection to anything else. I remember when I was just starting to learn Torah, I learned in a yeshiva, it's called a Baal Tshuva yeshiva. A yeshiva for late beginners, they call it. Late beginners. It's in a few buildings down from the Rebbe's headquarters, Hadar HaTorah. It still is a yeshiva, it still is very good. And we had an idea. That maybe we could make wine. I don't know where the idea, actually I know where the idea came from. It's not important. There was a very wonderful Jew. His name was Rabbi, how can I forget his name? And he lived right down the street from the Rebbe. Well-known Jew, anyway. And I was sort of friendly with him, and he taught me how to make wine. So we would make wine. We decided maybe we'll make wine from the yeshiva. So we wrote into the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said, the occupation of a boy learning in yeshiva has to be only learning Torah. That's it. Only learning Torah. When oich di avoda, the gemilas chasadim, was fordert sich zu lieb dem limud Torah. And even though true, if you learn the Torah, so you're not supposed to be removed from other people's needs. There's people who have to put on tefillin. There's people that's non-religious Jews. You have to have an influence on them. He says, yes, you have to. But never, you have to do good deeds as well. Like the saying goes, call a Omer in li'alo Torah. A person that says, all I have is Torah. I don't deal anything to do with anything else. Just Torah. It says he hasn't got the Torah either. Because there has to be kindness to other people. It says, okay, so do that kindness. But the Torah, it says, because the Torah without acts of kindness is not sufficient. You have to have Torah and acts of kindness. But therefore the Rebbeim, therefore all the rabbis demanded, of Chabad, they demanded, for Nemen Mitten, for Shiden, therefore you have to spread out the teachings of Hasidut, and especially spreading out Judaism in general, putting tefillin on people, putting mezuzahs on people's doors. But this what you do, and you do acts of kindness to others, as important as it is, it should Zayin and Zohar has to be in such a way was the Talmidim nit uprising from their Vain Einzikun with Torah, from unifying learning Torah. Therefore, like in the Chabad yeshivas, they go out on Friday. Usually they go out on Friday. No Arab, but exactly the opposite. Zu lieb them as their Torah, the Torah Zol Zayin, v'yas darf Zayin, in order the Torah should be in a proper way. Therefore, they have to also spice it up with good deeds. But what's the point the Rebbe wants to make here? Learning Torah is a special endeavor. It's one of the three pillars that Judaism stands on. Torah, avodah, gemilas chasadim. Learning Torah, prayer, and acts of kindness. Says the Rebbe, when you are involved in learning Torah, that's a special one. It can't be interrupted by anything else. Therefore, the way that Yosef learned Torah, that he did not sink himself into the Torah in order to get away from the world and also to be separate from the world. No, Yosef, he learned Torah, but also he was totally involved in the world. When he was in the world, he was, okay, certain people can do that. But people like Yosef, very big tzaddikim. And even the way that Yosef did do it, it was not truly the commandment of learning Torah. Commandment of learning Torah is, at least in those few years when a boy is in the yeshiva, he's totally sunk in the Torah. And durach limud Torah, by means of learning Torah, and as often in such a way, hot und vet the Welt, the world will have a existence. That's one of the pillars upon the world. So when learning Torah, it cannot be a casual thing, and it cannot be a partial part of the day. When a Jew really wants that, I mean, it's very good. If you can't learn Torah at all, it's better you learn 1 minute than nothing, and better 2 minutes than 1 minute, and better an hour than a minute. There's no doubt about it. But ideally, it's supposed to be when you sink yourself into the Torah, that's the only thing you're doing is just learning. That's the true idea of learning Torah. Right? Whatever you learn in Torah, it's a good, wonderful thing. But the true aspect of learning Torah is that you're sunk totally in the Torah in that time. And that's why Yehuda, who he knew that in order to be connected to God, you have to be separate from the world. He had to make a yeshiva because the yeshiva is something like being a shepherd, separate from the world, devoting yourself only to learning Torah, period. And then after those couple of years before the wedding or whatever, or maybe even a couple of years after your wedding, after that time is finished, then you get involved in other things as well. Then you have Torah. But the ideal thing of learning Torah is only total devotion to learning the Torah, if possible, 24/7 or as much as you can. The only reason you go to sleep and you eat is in order that you won't be tired to learn Torah and you won't be hungry to learn Torah. But the main thing is learning Torah in the time when you learn. Therefore, Yaakov sent Yehuda, who was a normal person and understood that in order to learn Torah, you have to be totally immersed in Torah and separate from the world, at least in the time when you're learning. Not like Yosef did. Okay, everyone, have a good day. You can look up on the YouTube, and I put up on the YouTube the Haftorah this week, wonderful Haftorah about Yechezkel and prophesying with a prophecy that he made immediately after the dry bones prophecy. The dry bones prophecy. And Yechezkel in general was a very interesting person because he was in the destruction of the first temple. He was witnessed. He's buried now in Babylon somewhere in Iraq. So look at that also. You can look that up. Shalom Uvracha. See you tomorrow, God willing, at 8:15 in the morning, and we'll finish the Devar Malchut that we almost finished today. Shalom Uvracha. Litrod. Have a good day with Moshiach. Now.